Chosen one, listen carefully. You have asked this question before. Why has your life been harder than it should have been? Why did your road narrow while others walked crowded highways? Why did people leave your life without explanation? Why did heaven seem silent when you cried out the most you felt it? The pressure, the loneliness, the confusion that made you wonder if something was wrong with you. But hear this truth, nothing about your path has been random. Those seasons were not accidents. They were not punishments. They were not signs that you were abandoned. They were trials, hidden trials, trials that most people will never understand, because most people were never meant to carry what you carry. Inside you lives something ancient, something powerful, a spark placed there before you ever arrived in this world, the inner God spark. And sparks like that cannot remain untested. They must be refined. They must be strengthened. They must pass through fire. That is why your life has looked different. Where others found comfort, you found pressure. Where others found acceptance, you faced rejection. Where others walked easy roads, you encountered resistance. Not because you were forgotten, because you were being forged. Most people break when these trials appear. They retreat, they numb themselves, they abandon their calling. But the chosen endure. They pass through the fire and come out refined. And when you begin to recognize these 9 unseen spiritual trials, something powerful happens. You stop questioning your journey. You begin understanding it. You finally see why your life has never followed ordinary patterns. Because ordinary paths were never designed for you. Spiritual awakening is not a moment, it is a process. A refining, a reshaping of your mind, a restructuring of your identity, a purification of your spirit. These trials often happen quietly, behind closed doors, in lonely nights. In seasons where you felt like everything was falling apart, but nothing was falling apart. Everything was being aligned. Today you are about to see the truth. The 9 unseen spiritual trials the chosen endure while their inner God spark is being refined. And stay with this message, because the final trial, the last one, is the one almost no one recognizes. Yet it is the one that unlocks spiritual authority. Now listen closely. First trial, isolation. Yes, the silence you experienced was not accidental. It was the beginning of separation. Have you noticed how certain people slowly disappeared from your life? Friends who once felt close suddenly drifted away. Conversations that once felt alive started feeling empty. Places that used to feel familiar began to feel strange. You noticed it. Something shifted, and you could not explain it. Listen carefully. This was not rejection, it was refinement. Isolation is one of the first fires the chosen must walk through. Because before your inner spark can fully ignite, the noise around you must fade. Too many voices, too many expectations, too many identities that were never truly yours. So the process begins. People leave, rooms grow quiet, distractions fall away. And in those long, silent nights, you begin asking deeper questions. Who am I really? Why am I here? Why does my spirit refuse to settle for ordinary living? That questioning is not weakness. That questioning is awakening. Many chosen ones misunderstand this season. They think something is wrong with them. They wonder why relationships feel shallow, why crowds suddenly feel exhausting, why solitude becomes strangely necessary. But the truth is powerful. Isolation is not abandonment. Isolation is preparation. It is the training ground where your inner voice becomes louder than the world's expectations. In the quiet, you start hearing yourself clearly. Your intuition sharpens. Your awareness expands. Your spirit begins remembering things your mind once ignored. And the enemy hates this stage, because a distracted soul is easy to control. But a soul that learns to stand alone becomes dangerous. Think about those nights when you sat alone questioning everything. No applause, no validation, just you and your thoughts. What you thought was loneliness was actually alignment. You were being separated from environments that could not carry your destiny. Because where you are going, not everyone can follow. And once you survive the trial of isolation, something changes inside you. You stop fearing solitude. You begin mastering it. But the journey does not stop there. Because after isolation comes another trial. far more unsettling. Second, the trial of identity collapse. This is where the process turns inward. This is where the fire gets closer. This is where you stop losing things around you and start losing the version of yourself you thought you had to be. Have you ever looked at your life and felt disconnected from everything you once fought so hard to build? The goals, the image, the role, the mask? What once felt important suddenly felt hollow. What once gave you direction started feeling heavy. What once looked like success began to feel like bondage. And that terrified you, because when identity starts collapsing, it feels like death. Not physical death, but the death of the false self. Listen carefully. This is one of the deepest unseen trials the chosen endure. Because the enemy does not only attack your peace, he attacks your sense of self. He wants you trapped in labels, trapped in performance, trapped in versions of yourself that were shaped by fear, survival, and other people's expectations. But your inner God spark cannot fully rise inside a life built on illusion. It cannot fully burn inside a name the world gave you. It cannot fully shine through a self-image crafted just to be accepted. It cannot fully lead you while your ego still sits on the throne. So the collapse begins. Suddenly, the ambition that once drove you loses its grip. The dream you chased for years feels empty. The identity you protected begins cracking under the weight of truth. And you panic. You ask yourself, what is happening to me? Why do I not want what I used to want? Why does the life I built no longer feel like mine? Because you are awakening. And awakening is not comfortable. It is costly. It is disruptive. It is confronting. The world tells you to build an identity. God strips it down. The world tells you to perform. Truth calls you to become. The world rewards image. The spirit demands authenticity. This is the tension. This is the warfare. Not everyone will understand this. Only the chosen recognize the pain of outgrowing a self that once kept them alive. You may have spent years becoming who others applauded, years becoming responsible, successful, predictable, impressive. But deep inside, your spirit was starving. And when your spirit can no longer breathe inside that false structure, it starts tearing the walls down. That is why things that once felt certain now feel artificial. That is why your old motivations no longer move you. That is why you can no longer pretend. You are not losing yourself. You are losing the costume. Remember this. Confusion in this season is not failure. Emptiness in this season is not defeat. The collapse is not punishment. It is reconstruction. It is the divine hand removing what cannot go with you. It is the sacred breaking of a false identity so your real self can emerge with power, with clarity, with anointing. And yes, the ego resists. It fights. It begs for control. It wants familiarity. It wants applause. It wants the old script. But you were not born to repeat an old script. You were born to carry destiny. So when your old life starts feeling foreign, do not run back. Stand still. Let the false fall. Let the shell crack. Let the old name die. Because what rises after identity collapse is stronger, cleaner, truer, and far more dangerous to darkness. Then comes another trial, one that reaches even deeper. Third, the trial of emotional purification. This is where the buried things begin to move. This is where the sealed rooms inside you start opening. This is where pain you thought was gone suddenly rises again with force. Have you ever asked yourself why old emotions came back when you were trying so hard to move forward? Why did grief return out of nowhere? Why did anger flare up when you thought you had healed? Why did old betrayals, childhood wounds, and deep regrets start replaying in your mind like they happened yesterday? Listen carefully. You are not going backward. You are being cleansed. This is one of the most misunderstood trials in the life of the chosen. Because when emotional purification begins, it feels messy. It feels heavy. It feels unfair. You think, I already dealt with this. I already cried over this. I already survived this. But survival is not the same as release, and suppression is not the same as healing. The world teaches you to hide pain, to bury it, to mask it, to move fast and pretend you are fine. But your spirit does not operate by the world's system. Your inner God spark cannot burn clearly through emotional fog. It cannot shine through layers of unresolved sorrow. It cannot rise with full power while old pain still grips your inner world. So what happens? The soul brings it up, not to shame you, not to break you, not to punish you, to free you. That wave of grief had a purpose. That sudden anger had a message. That ache in your chest was exposing something darkness hoped would remain buried forever. Because buried pain becomes hidden bondage, and hidden bondage weakens spiritual authority. Do not ignore this. The enemy loves unhealed wounds. He hides inside them. He speaks through them. He uses old pain to distort your identity, poison your relationships, and cloud your discernment. That is why this trial is warfare, real warfare. Not everything rising inside you is meant to destroy you. Some of it is surfacing so it can finally leave. Have you noticed how certain memories returned with unusual strength? A betrayal you thought was over, a rejection from childhood, a moment of abandonment, a wound you covered with strength because you had no choice, and suddenly it was all there again. You felt it in your body, in your thoughts, in your prayers, in your silence. But chosen one, that resurfacing was not failure. It was purification. The Spirit was clearing out what your future cannot carry. Because where you are going, you cannot drag old chains into new dimensions. You cannot step into greater favor while carrying old poison. You cannot hold divine fire in a heart still crowded by pain that no longer belongs there. So yes, you cried harder. Yes, you felt more deeply. Yes, there were nights when the emotions came in waves and you thought you were drowning. But you were not drowning. You were being washed. Remember this: the pain that surfaced was leaving. The grief that shook you was loosening its hold. The memories that returned were being stripped of their power. And once this purification begins, something holy happens. Your heart gets lighter. Your discernment gets sharper. Your spirit gets cleaner. Your peace gets stronger. What once triggered you no longer controls you. What once haunted you no longer defines you. What once sat in darkness is now exposed to light. Only the chosen understand this kind of cleansing. Only the chosen know what it means to feel broken open and realize it was God making room for more. And after emotional purification, another trial comes. One even more unsettling. Fourth, the trial of divine silence. This is the trial that shakes almost everyone. This is the place where the world turns back. This is the place where the chosen are revealed. Have you ever cried out for direction and heard nothing? No sign, no answer, no confirmation, just silence. You prayed, you waited, you watched, and still, nothing moved. The door did not open, the message did not come. The clarity you begged for did not arrive when you expected it. And for a moment you wondered the dangerous question: did heaven stop listening? Listen carefully. No. Divine silence is not divine absence. It only feels that way to the part of you that still depends on visible proof. This is why this trial is deeper than emotional pain. This is why it cuts harder than isolation. Because now it is not people who seem distant, it is God, or so it appears. But this silence has an assignment, a holy assignment. It is stripping you of spiritual dependence on constant reassurance. The world needs signs every hour. The world needs applause. The world needs visible results to keep moving. But you are not called to walk like the world. You are called to walk by inner knowing, by alignment, by mature faith, by the quiet fire within. That is why the signs faded. That is why the heavens seemed closed. That is why your prayers met stillness. Not because you were rejected, because you were being trained. The chosen must learn how to keep walking when the sky is quiet. The chosen must learn how to move when there is no applause from earth and no immediate echo from heaven. The chosen must learn how to trust what has already been planted inside them. Do you understand what this means? It means your spirit was being developed beyond emotion, beyond dependence, beyond spiritual comfort. Anyone can praise when the signs are flowing. Anyone can feel strong when every prayer is answered quickly. Anyone can call themselves guided when the path is obvious. But what about when the light goes dim? What about when the silence stretches? What about when the darkness whispers you were never chosen at all? That is where the battle intensifies. Because the enemy loves divine silence. He tries to weaponize it. He tells you the stillness means abandonment. He tells you the delay means denial. He tells you the quiet means you have lost favor, but the enemy lies. Silence is often where favor deepens. Silence is often where roots grow. Silence is often where your discernment is purified from dependency on spectacle. Remember this: you were never meant to need a sign for every step. You were never meant to live addicted to confirmation. You were never meant to mistake spiritual noise for true guidance. There were seasons when you asked for clarity and received only stillness, yet somehow you kept moving. You did not have language for it. You did not have proof for it, but deep inside you knew. Take the step, leave the place, release the person, hold the line, stay faithful. That quiet persistence was not weakness, it was maturity. It was the birth of inner trust. And this is where the path of the chosen separates from the path of the world. The world runs when silence comes. The chosen becomes still enough to hear deeper. The world demands outer proof. The chosen develop inward certainty. The world panics in quiet. The chosen are forged there. Not everyone will understand this. Only the chosen recognize the power of continuing without visible confirmation. And once you survive divine silence, your spirit becomes harder to manipulate, harder to intimidate, harder to deceive. Then comes another trial, one that strikes through people, not silence. Fifth, the trial of misunderstanding. This is where you stop expecting everyone to understand your change. This is where you begin to see the distance, not because you stopped loving people, but because your spirit started seeing what others could not see. Have you ever tried to explain what was happening inside you and watch people look at you like you had changed too much? They said you were distant. They said you were different. They said you were too intense, too serious, too deep. And the more clearly you started seeing, the less clearly they seemed to see you. Listen carefully. This was not random. This was a trial. Because when your awareness expands, your relationships are tested. When your discernment sharpens, perception gaps appear. When your spirit begins waking up, you notice patterns, motives, and energies that others still ignore. And that changes everything. Suddenly, small talk feels empty. Certain rooms feel heavy. Certain conversations feel forced. Certain people become uncomfortable around you even when you say very little. Why? Because light exposes, and exposure makes darkness uneasy. Not everyone will understand this. Only the chosen recognize what it feels like to carry truth in environments built on illusion. You began noticing what others called normal was not normal at all. You began sensing deception behind smiles. You began feeling warfare in places others called harmless. You began hearing what was not being said. You began discerning what could not be explained with ordinary language. And when you tried to speak from that place, many did not receive it. They dismissed you, misread you, labeled you. That hurt, because part of you wanted to be understood. Part of you wanted your heart to be seen. Part of you wanted to share what was awakening inside you without being made to feel strange for it. But this trial had a purpose. It was teaching you a sacred boundary. Not every truth belongs in every room. Not every revelation belongs in every conversation. Not every person has the capacity to hold what God is unfolding in you. Remember this. Misunderstanding is often the cost of spiritual growth. The world only understands what matches its level of sight, but you were never called to stay blind just to remain accepted. That is the pivot. That is the shift. Because at first, misunderstanding wounds you, then it trains you, then it strengthens you. You learn when to speak. You learn when to remain silent. You learn that discernment is not only about seeing others clearly, it is about knowing where your spirit is safe to unfold. This is preparation, because if you cannot endure being misunderstood, you will shrink every time destiny calls you to stand apart. If you need everyone's approval, you will betray your own assignment. If you keep explaining your anointing to those committed to misunderstanding you, you will drain the very strength heaven is trying to build in you. Do not ignore this. Some of the confusion around you was never meant to stop you. It was meant to mature you. You were being prepared to carry truth without begging for validation. Prepared to hold your peace when others projected. Prepared to remain clear when people distorted your intentions. Prepared to walk in favor even when others called it pride. Prepared to stand in light while darkness tried to recast you as the problem. And once this lesson enters your spirit, something powerful happens. You stop chasing understanding. You start guarding revelation. You stop forcing connection. You start honoring alignment. Then another trial appears, one that tests whether you will trade your calling for comfort. Sixth, the trial of temptation. This is where your path becomes dangerous, not because you are weak, but because you are close, very close. Have you ever noticed how the moment you begin to grow, the wrong doors suddenly start opening? The old life calls again, old people return, old habits whisper, old desires dress themselves up and present themselves like opportunity, and for a moment it looks harmless. It looks familiar, it looks easy, it looks rewarding, but listen carefully. Not every open door is from God. Not every opportunity is favor. Not every quick path is destiny. Some doors are tests. This is what temptation really is for the chosen. It is not just seduction into obvious sin. It is the invitation to trade your higher calling for lower comfort, to trade depth for ease, to trade transformation for temporary relief. And the test always comes at critical moments, right when you are tired, right when you are stretched, right when the process feels heavy, right when the unknown starts costing more than you expected. Then suddenly something appears, an easier route, a familiar attachment, a shortcut, a counterfeit success, a place that asks less of your spirit and more of your old nature. And you feel the pull, because temptation does not come looking ugly. It comes dressed in convenience. It comes dressed in validation. It comes dressed in immediate reward. The enemy knows this. He knows he cannot always stop the chosen by force. So he offers distraction, compromise, comfort, a polished version of your past. Why? Because he understands the weight of your assignment. He sees the fire on your life. He sees the anointing maturing. He sees your inner God spark becoming stronger, clearer, more dangerous to darkness. And when that happens, temptation increases. Not to expose your weakness, to reveal your loyalty. Do you truly want transformation, or do you only want escape from discomfort? That is the question hidden inside every temptation. Do you want healing, or just relief? Do you want destiny, or just safety? Do you want the real path, or the familiar cage? Not everyone will understand this. Only the chosen recognize that some of the strongest temptations arrive right before breakthrough. You may have stood at that crossroads already. You could have gone back to the people who kept you small, back to the habits that numbed your spirit, back to the version of you that was accepted by the world but disconnected from truth. It would have been easier, but easier is not holier. Easier is not higher. Easier is not your calling. Remember this. Every temptation you resist strengthens your spiritual gravity. Every counterfeit you reject sharpens your discernment. Every old cycle you refuse to re-enter increases your authority. This is preparation, because the greater your destiny, the more refined your yes must become. You cannot carry divine fire with a divided heart. You cannot step into larger favor while still entertaining what was sent to pull you backward. You cannot hold your position in light while secretly negotiating with darkness. So when temptation appears, do not panic. Recognize it, name it, reject the counterfeit, stand firm, because what looks like deprivation is actually protection. What feels like sacrifice is actually alignment. And what you walk away from in obedience loses the power to own you. This is where many turn back, but not you. You were not refined to return to what broke you. You were refined to outrun it. And after temptation, another trial rises, one that reveals just how serious the warfare really is. Seventh, the trial of invisible warfare. This is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. This is where you realize your life has never been random. This is where the chosen stop calling everything coincidence. Have you ever noticed that the moment you get serious about your purpose, resistance multiplies? Plans that once moved suddenly stall. Doors that seemed open suddenly jam shut. Small issues become heavy battles. You try to move forward and something unseen pushes back, again and again. Conflict rises for no clear reason. Misunderstandings appear out of nowhere. Your energy drops. Your focus gets hit. Your peace gets tested. And the strange part is this. It often happens right when you are aligning, right when you become clearer, right when you become more disciplined, right when you start obeying what your spirit has been telling you all along. Listen carefully. That is not random pressure. That is invisible warfare. Because when you begin aligning with deeper purpose, resistance intensifies. When your inner God spark grows brighter, darkness notices. When your assignment becomes clearer, the enemy does not sit back and applaud. He resists, not because you are failing, because you are advancing. This is one of the clearest marks of the chosen. Your life has been shaped by unusual opposition because your life carries unusual weight. Not everyone will understand this. Only the chosen recognize what it feels like to meet resistance that seems bigger than the visible moment. You thought it was just bad timing, just another setback, just one more hard season. But over time, you began to see the pattern. Every time you moved toward healing, something tried to pull you into chaos. Every time you committed to discipline, distractions increased. Every time you stepped toward destiny, pressure surrounded the step. Why? Because warfare follows anointing. The enemy does not waste that kind of pressure on empty vessels. Darkness does not mobilize against what carries no threat. Hell does not react strongly to a life with no assignment. But your life has an assignment. That is why the warfare has been so persistent. That is why your endurance has had to grow. That is why you have been forced to become stronger than you ever planned to be. Remember this: resistance was never proof that you were on the wrong path. It was often proof that you had finally found the right one. That delayed project, that sudden conflict, that collapse in momentum, that exhaustion that tried to make you quit. None of it was meaningless. It was forging you, because invisible warfare does something the world cannot understand. It builds spiritual stamina. It develops holy resilience. It teaches you how to keep moving when conditions are hostile. It teaches you how to protect your peace without surrendering your ground. It teaches you how to pray, discern, endure, and advance even while pressure surrounds you. You were not being singled out for destruction. You were being trained for endurance, and now you can see it. The obstacles did not just block you. They built you. The delays did not just frustrate you. They fortified you. The battles did not just wound you. They revealed the strength already hidden in you. This is where identity solidifies. You stop asking, "Why is this always happening to me?" And you start declaring, "This pressure has been preparing me." Because it has. You were being shaped into someone darkness could not easily break. Someone favor could trust. Someone purpose could rest upon. And after invisible warfare, another trial comes. One that strips away your final need to control the process. Eighth, the trial of surrender. This is the breaking point of the old way. This is the place where striving loses its power. This is the place where control slips through your fingers and you realize you were never meant to carry the whole weight alone. Have you ever reached a moment where nothing responded to your effort anymore? You planned carefully. You pushed harder. You tried to force the outcome. You tried to hold everything together, and still it fell apart. The door would not move. The answer would not come. The path you thought was certain dissolved right in front of you. That is when panic usually rises, because the flesh wants control, the ego wants certainty, the old self wants guarantees before obedience. But listen carefully. Surrender is not defeat. It is not weakness. It is not quitting. It is not losing your assignment. Surrender is the holy moment when your spirit stops wrestling against what your soul already knows. This is why the pressure increased. This is why the plans kept collapsing. This is why the path became impossible to manage through pure effort. You were being brought to the end of self-management, not to destroy you, to align you. The world worships control. The chosen are taught surrender. The world says force it. The spirit says trust. The world says make it happen. The divine says let what is true emerge. Not everyone will understand this. Only the chosen recognize the agony of being led into a place where your own strength no longer works. And that agony is real, because surrender feels like dying before it feels like peace. It feels like standing in uncertainty with empty hands. It feels like releasing outcomes you prayed over. It feels like letting go of timelines, expectations, and personal scripts you thought were necessary for your future. You wanted clear answers. Instead, you were asked for trust. You wanted visible movement. Instead, you were asked to release. You wanted to control the process. Instead, the process began controlling you. Remember this: when God calls you to surrender, it is not because your future is collapsing. It is because your grip is interfering with the shape of what is trying to be born. There were things you could not force into alignment: relationships, doors, destinations, versions of yourself. And every time you tried to control them, the resistance grew. Why? Because opposition in this season was not always an attack. Sometimes it was protection, sometimes it was redirection, sometimes it was the hand of God refusing to let you build a future out of fear. That is the revelation. Some closed doors were mercy, some delays were mercy, some frustrations were mercy. Because the deeper your calling, the less you are allowed to build from ego. You may have spent years pushing toward one life, one outcome, one direction. Then one day, exhausted and stripped, you finally let go. No more forcing, no more clinging, no more bargaining. And in that release, something shifted. Peace came back. Clarity returned. Unexpected doors opened. New paths appeared that you never could have manufactured on your own. That is what surrender does. It turns pressure into alignment. It turns striving into trust. It turns confusion into clean direction. You do not become smaller through surrender. You become clearer, stronger, more dangerous to darkness. Because once control dies, true authority can rise. And now you are ready for the final trial, the deepest one, the one that changes everything. Ninth, the trial of inner authority. This is the final unveiling. This is the moment the search ends. This is the moment you realize what you were reaching for was already alive within you. Have you ever wondered why no outside voice could fully settle your spirit? Why one more teacher was not enough? Why one more method was not enough? Why one more sign, one more system, one more human approval never brought complete peace? Because this final trial was never about finding power outside yourself. It was about awakening to the divine spark within. Listen carefully. Everything led here. The isolation, the collapse, the purification, the silence, the misunderstanding, the temptation, the warfare, the surrender. All of it was stripping away dependency. All of it was removing idols. All of it was breaking the habit of looking outward for what heaven already planted inward. This is the shift. You stop living like someone waiting to be authorized. You stop begging to be recognized. You stop asking the world to confirm what God already sealed. Not everyone will understand this. Only the chosen recognize the moment when seeking turns into knowing. And that knowing is quiet, but it is powerful. You begin to move differently. You decide differently. You discern differently. The doubt that used to paralyze you loses its grip. The need for validation falls away. The hunger to be understood by everyone begins to die. Why? Because you no longer need permission to carry what was always yours. This is inner authority, not arrogance, not ego, not performance, alignment. It is the deep certainty that your spirit knows. It is the settled fire that does not need to prove itself. It is the anointing becoming conscious of itself. You felt this change. What once confused you now becomes clear. What once made you second-guess now meets a steady yes or no within. What once sent you searching in circles now meets a stillness that says, I know who I am. Remember this: the final trial was never about making you smaller. It was about making you undeniable. Darkness wanted you dependent. Fear wanted you hesitant. The enemy wanted you always searching, never standing, always doubting, never embodying. But you survived too much to remain uncertain now. You did not endure all of that fire just to keep living beneath your calling. You were being led to embodiment, to carry the spark, to trust the spark, to live from the spark. Chosen one. None of those trials were sent to destroy you. They were sent to refine you. Every lonely season, every breaking of identity, every silent night when no answer came, all of it was shaping you into a vessel strong enough to carry what was placed inside you before the foundation of your life. Most people run from this kind of fire. They avoid it. They numb it. They call it too much. But you walked through it. And if you saw yourself in these 9 unseen spiritual trials, then write 9 in the comments. Let it be your witness. Let it be your confirmation. Let it be your declaration that you now understand why your path was different. And subscribe if you are ready to keep walking this narrow road with the chosen, because you were never wandering. You were never being punished. You were never forgotten. You were being forged. And the very fire that once made you feel like you were falling apart is the same fire now making your spirit impossible to extinguish.